upbringing, completely by accident, turned out to be great training. I was an Air Force brat. We moved almost every year of my young life, and I went to 14 schools from grades 1 through 12. And I didn't realize it at the time, but being the new kid all the time forced you to learn how to meet people, put yourself out there, try to fit in no matter where you were. And it turned out to be great training for the news business. I got my first television news job. I started April 1st, 1974. I was a high school senior. I was 16, almost 17. And I was desperate for money for college. So I tried out for a beauty pageant. I can't even believe I did that in retrospect, because I wasn't beautiful, but I was somewhat smart, and I thought this would be easy money. And part of the deal was they took all of us contestants to a television station, and we did the requisite noon news interview with somebody on the set. And when they came to me and asked me what I wanted to be, until that very moment, I said attorney, because that's what I wanted to be. But my mouth opened and I said, I want to do what you do. I'd like to be a reporter. And I, to this day, don't know why I said it. But in the little tour we took at the station after the interviews, he mentioned, the guy who was giving us the tour mentioned to the news director, oh, Mr. Buck, Chris here, she wants to be a reporter. And he kind of patted me on the shoulder and said, well, that's fantastic. Come back when you're older. And I called him a few days later and said, Mr. Buck, I met you a few days ago and you told me to come back when I'm older, and I'm older today. And if you hire me every day, I'll get older and older. So you just might as well go for it. And I don't necessarily, he had a good laugh, but I don't necessarily think he would have hired me, except the next part of my pitch was, I can arrange for an internship through our career education program at my high school. So you don't even have to pay me anything. And so I went to KBCI. It changed names, call letters during the time I was there, and got as much high school credit as I could, and then got college credit. And then when they had to start paying me, I made $2 an hour. I still have my first work contract. So, and when I asked for a raise, because I was going to college in the mornings, anchoring the noon and 5:30 news, and then going to work at an Italian restaurant at night. That was in the days before they called it pasta. We were still serving spaghetti. And I was kind of concerned about my credibility, because people were recognizing me as I served them their spaghetti. And so I asked for a raise from $2 to $2.50 an hour. And I was told, well, the girls up front who answer the phones have been here a lot longer than you, and they don't make $2.50 an hour. And I was also told at one point, 100 other girls, it was always girls, 100 other girls want your job. So if you don't want to work for this, we can find somebody else who will. Thrilled. My mother especially, I think she lived vicariously through me the years that I was a reporter. And when I opted to get out of the business, she was a lot more upset about it than I was. She really liked, saying that her daughter was on the news. And, I would, every time I did, like, went to a movie junket and got star interviews and photographs of me and, somebody, I would send them home, and she kept all of them. So I have a lot of that stuff. My mom kept every clipping, every photo, everything. They loved it. I'm not sure if the harassment or ribbing or whatever you call it was because I was female or because I was so young. because I did start when I was 16, and by the time I was 17, I was anchoring the news and doing reports and live shots and everything else. I got a lot of comments like, take those damn little bows out of your hair, you know, things like that. And you know, a lot of eye rolling and things, but I think it was because I was young, not necessarily because I was female. However, I will say I had a long time relationship with one of the male reporters in the newsroom. Tim Storrs was his name. He's not alive anymore, but we lived together for probably 5 years or so and anchored the news together. We called it co-anchoring the newscast of life. And I always felt bad because he went to journalism school and he was an excellent reporter and he taught me so much. And yet I got all the job offers because I was a woman. And in those days, you know, they were getting a lot of flack for hiring, you know, white guys in suits. And so all the newsrooms were looking for women and also, you know, people of color. And Tim, as a, you know, white guy, just couldn't get a break. And so I got a job from Boise. I went to Portland, Oregon, and I would always talk to the news director, and then he hired Tim, you know. Or when I went to Dallas, I talked to the news director, and he wanted to hire Tim, but Tim didn't want to go to Texas. So, yeah. But I think the hassle I got was mostly from being young, because now looking back on it, people who went to journalism school and got their degrees and everything, they probably resented me, and I don't really blame them. Oh gosh, it was trying to think of how to say it. If you had told me at 8 o'clock in the morning that I would not be employed at WFAA by noon, I would not have believed you. I was with a videographer. I want to say it was David Chayka, but I can't remember. I was with a videographer and we were out near the airport doing an interview with Tommy Lee Jones, who had a movie coming out. And we had just gotten set up and just started rolling when we were called back to the newsroom. And we thought, since we were near the airport, maybe there had been a plane crash or something, and that they needed us right away. But no, we were told to come back to the newsroom. And they needed the photographer for something else. And Doug Fox at the time was making the assignments and just said, you know, Chris, you're doing a feature. We need this shooter for news. And I said, well, then I guess you don't need me. And I picked up my purse and my girl reporter, you know, notebooks and left. And I honestly thought that, you know, the next day or maybe even that afternoon, somebody would call me and say, Chris, come on in and talk this over. And instead, I got a call saying I could pick up my last paycheck at the front desk. And so that's what happened. But I called the Dallas Observer and I said, look, I've got this interview with Tommy Lee Jones. I'll go finish it if you want it. And so I went back out there, and Tommy Lee Jones, I told him the story and he was so nice. He gave me all this movie, you know, swag and everything, and did a really good interview with me. And I recorded it on my little tape recorder. And I did the story for print. You have to be about tenacity to do this gig. You have to be, you know, you have to not be afraid to talk to anybody, ask anybody anything. And I mean, I remember, I can't even believe I did things like this. But at one point when I was looking for a job, it was around the holidays, and I wrapped my audition tapes up like Christmas presents and sent them to news directors. I can't even believe I did that. How embarrassing. But I got offers. So, you know, happy holidays. I also realized how competitive it was, especially up in the higher markets. I was in smaller size cities, Boise and Portland. It was a little more competitive in Portland. But when I got to Dallas, I realized it was the kind of shop where if you had a story, don't talk to certain people about it because they would take it. And I wasn't used to that. I was used to more collegial, you know, uh, after your newscast, you'd all go to the bar across the street and have a beer together, and you had holidays together and you hung out together because you were all broke and you were all reporters. And, you know, that was just the way it was. And then in Dallas, it was a whole different thing. It was just a whole different level of competition between each other. I didn't mind competing with the other stations. I didn't want to compete with my coworkers. And that was a real revelation to me. I honestly thought that I would live out my non-compete clause because in those days, those were taken very seriously. And I'd go back on the air at one of the other stations. But in the meantime, I got pregnant. And so I thought, well, I'll just have the baby and then I'll go back on the air. But I had to do something to make a living between that point and, whenever. And I just started teaching at SMU in the journalism school, in the communication school. And I started doing corporate stuff, mostly because at SMU, all the professors were on the tenure track pretty much except me. And so companies would call the comms school and ask for, we want to put our annual report on videotape, or is there somebody who could help us revamp our newsletter, or do you have anybody who's a speechwriter? And nobody else really wanted to do those things, so I did them. They would hand me the phone messages, and I got some really great corporate contacts there and launched the biz. And I realized soon after that it was easier to be a mom and do the corporate hours than it was to be a mom and do the news hours. I mean, I remember how people like Peggy Waymeyer, our religion reporter at Channel 8, were treated when she went on maternity leave. They put all of her stuff in a box, and when she came back, she had to share a desk with somebody else because she didn't really need a desk because she wasn't there full time, that kind of stuff. It was really obvious that motherhood kind of put you on the second tier, on the bench, as it were. And I really resented that and thought, man, I don't want my career to go that way. I think you should be able to do it all. And so, I ended up writing speeches and annual reports and videos and all kinds of stuff, editing things, filling in on radio news. The training I got in TV news served me really well to do other things. It seemed like the only women who could have kids and get away with it, it's amazing to have to put it that way, were the ones on the network, like on the morning shows where they had nannies or whatever. The rest of us were like, you can't do that. You can't do that. There's no way you can be a serious journalist and be a mother. Well, I think many women have proven them wrong. And, I had hoped to be one of them. But, I did keep my hand in the business. I wrote for the morning news, Dallas Morning News. I wrote for the Dallas Times Herald. I wrote for the Dallas Observer. I wrote for D Magazine. I did some work for the public TV station in Dallas. When I moved to Boise, I did some work for the public TV station there, moved back to Boise. I got divorced and moved back to Idaho. But yeah, it wasn't easy being a mom in the biz. They made it very clear that you were suddenly second string, no matter how good a reporter you were. I suppose if I have a regret, It's that I didn't go to the network because I wanted to, and I could have. I was a good reporter. And yeah, but by then I had a little kid, and then I got divorced when he was 4, and I just couldn't see how to make it work. I couldn't see how to make it work. So yeah, I hung back when I really wanted to move forward. I did my stint as, well, at that time we called them weather bunnies. Every station had one, the girl who did the weather. And so I was the fill-in girl who did the weather. And they sent me out to the National Weather Service office at the Boise airport, and I spent a couple hours out there. They gave me a little golden book of weather that basically said, high pressure, things are sunny, low pressure, things are cloudy, whatever, what do you need to know? So I stood there and, pointed and did my weather casts. And one day the forecast was variable clouds. And I said on the air, and the forecast is variable clouds, whatever the hell that means. And then I just kept going. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw the news director fly into the studio, and he was red. And I mean, you couldn't say hell, I guess. You couldn't say hell on the air back then. And so I was fired that day after the newscast. And his exact quote was, "You are stupid and you are fired." And so he was yelling, he yelled. And I went, took my purse and my girl reporter notebooks and I left. And I thought my career was over. And a couple days later, the general manager called me and invited me back in and said, "Well, this is a dilemma. We've gotten more calls from people saying it's about time somebody told it like it was on the weather." And so, come on back. Just watch your mouth. Bad decisions make good stories. Certainly been true in my career. I know I didn't like covering plane crashes. I don't like the way they smell. And I didn't really like seeing dead bodies at police crime scenes. Yeah, but I can remember more what I didn't like. And I also didn't like having to go up to people's doors when they had lost a loved one and find out how they were feeling. It's like, well, how the hell do you think they're feeling? Why do we have to stick a microphone in their face? I mean, I did it. I was good at it, but I really, it's like I apologized all the way up and all the way back, Um, I loved being on general assignment. I only took I ended up being the movie critic when Jane Horwitz left for a while, mostly just because I wanted to do something fun. I got tired of murders, fires, and trials, and live shots. I just wanted to do something more fun. I didn't think it would be permanent. And I didn't know that Marty, Haig, the news director, would resent it. He thought I ought to be doing hard news. And he really pushed me to stay with the news. And I just said, I just need a break. I'll do a really good job of the entertainment stuff. I just want to try it for a while. And I think that just branded me as expendable. Pete McKeeman, videographer Pete McKeeman, and I covered Hurricane Frederick. And that involved us being in somewhere in Mississippi. It was a tough one. We were right on the coast and when it hit, and we spent that night under a desk in a principal's office of a grade school. And we were having camera problems, which we fixed with a flashlight and the silver side, metallic side of a gum wrapper. And somehow we got the camera to work. We got really great stuff. The next morning, we had to try to get it to the station. we found an airport and I had to rent a small plane. They didn't take Visa, they didn't take MasterCard, they didn't take whatever, but they took like a gas card like Shell or Chevron. They took a gas card. So I rented a plane using this gas card. And then I had to get on the plane and fly back to Dallas. Pete had to take our four-wheel drive vehicle and find his way back on his own. So covered the story, got it all put together. I thought we did a kick-ass job. And the next day, I got called into Marty's office. And I thought, he's gonna say, you get a raise. You kicked ass out there. And instead, I shut the door and he goes, you look like shit out there. And I said, I'm sorry, what? And he said, haven't you ever heard of waterproof mascara? And I said, Marty, I was so pissed. I said, I was hanging onto a power pole so as not to fly into the Gulf of Mexico. I was not thinking about cosmetics. And I just turned and walked out. When I was in Boise, I covered a murder trial. My first murder trial was Thomas Creech, and he's still on death row in Idaho. And I was so young and so new at this that when people said, well, you need to get to know your sources, whatever. Well, I used to just go over to the jail while he was before his trial and talk to him. And, and we corresponded. I still have letters. He wrote me poems. It wasn't romantic at all. I had a boyfriend and stuff, but we kind of got to know each other a little bit. And then I covered the trial. And he got up on the stand. He had a real grandstanding attorney that I think was just in it for the notoriety, not because he was a very good attorney. But when Tom got up on the stand, his defense was, well, I killed, I want to say it was 26 people, but not these two. And I didn't know what to do with that as an 18-year-old. I did not know what to do with that. So, especially somebody who'd been, chatting with him, chatting him up, going to the jail and sitting around and, chatting with the guards. And so, but I had for a while, I'm told, a fan club at the Idaho State Penitentiary. So I guess that's something to be proud of. I don't know. You need to learn how to write, and you need to learn how to write tight. No flabby sentences, no run on, no subordinate clauses, just you need to learn how to write conversationally. And it will help you not just in the news business, but in so many other aspects of your life. Even if all you do is write home and ask for money because you're not making enough, there'll be better letters and you're more likely to get the money. In terms of television, my advice would be don't sleep with the videographers, because it might be fun and you might have a rollicking good time for a while, but you've still got to work with them when it doesn't work out. So I would suggest that. And I would say, oh yeah, if you're going to be on the air, dress the part. Right now, I see so many young women with the plunging necklines and the cutout shoulders and the long, dangly, shiny earrings. And I think, were you supposed to be at a cocktail party and they called you in at the last minute? Seriously, look the part. You are shooting yourself in the foot in terms of your own credibility when you dress like a hooker. So don't. How can you expect people to listen to what you're saying if they're staring at what you're wearing? It's easy. You took the time to write it and you think it's important. So don't blow your credibility by having them stare at your, whatever they're staring at, when they ought to be listening to what you're saying. I'm the news director for Public News Service, which is a content provider, news content provider, in 40 states. And we do radio and print versions of stories, and we send them out, and they're picked up by mostly small stations, but some of the big ones just use our sound, but they use their own reporting. And it's mostly sort of social justice, education, that kind of thing that we cover. The whole point of it is to, for lack of a better term, lift up voices that aren't heard very often in the news biz. And it's going gangbusters. I'm always surprised that our numbers are so high. And I was a producer for them, which is what they call reporters, for the first 10 years that I worked with them. And then I became an editor, and then the senior editor. And then they asked me to be the news director last year. And I said, okay, because I don't know how to do, I have only one skill. Other people know how to play the piano or whatever. I do news. That's what I do. That's who I am. That's what I do. It's what I'll always do. So yeah, it's like learning something new every day. You never know, especially on general assignment, you never know when you come in what's going to be happening. I love it because you're always learning something, and you get to see everything from, rock stars to presidential candidates to homeless people. And there's always a way to relate to somebody, no matter what it is. I think the news business is in a really scary, precarious position right now, just because so many people don't trust us. And my theory is that over time, journalists tend to be a little more liberal only because we see so much more than the average person sees. We cover so much more injustice than the average person is even aware of, I think. And over time, it tends to wear on you, but in a good way. It makes you think harder about things that people maybe don't think about much in their day-to-day lives. But I do think the business is in a scary time. I see the rise of citizen journalists, and some of them are probably very good, but there's no standards that they have to meet, in terms of ethics and in terms of not putting your opinion in things, not injecting your own feelings into things. And I think that's a little scary when there's no guardrails.